We have some minutes we can dispose of later on. We have the election of the chair and an update from the finance department, and obviously the big bit of business is the budget revision request that we were all just speaking of. So, Ross, if we can do a little housekeeping.
I move approval of both sets of minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I nominate you for the chair.
Let's wait till Fred's not here. We can just, basically
I know.
nominate and vote him in. We'll be all set.
You'd be happy about it.
Okay. We'll leave that alone. So, do you want to start talking about the budget request? We can start to talk through the memo. I know she's going to get some more copies of this, but
Why don't you, Chief?
yeah, Chief, why don't you?
You're on.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So obviously we've been sort of thinking about this for a while. So to have sort of the pieces put together of how you would spend this money, and so if you want to sort of start walking through the memo, sure.
Can you turn those two mics off?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably true.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be able to address the Finance Committee. This in front of you, hopefully you have a copy of the police department's hopeful plan as to how to allocate $1.25 million for budget enhancement this year, this fiscal year, for the remainder of the fiscal year. And you'll notice that it is broken into four priorities or four categories. I do want to say that there has been a few changes. There will be, I'm sure, some other changes as we go down the road, but these reflect pretty much what our hopes are. Hiring is the number one goal behind the extra funding, and then camera acquisition, both in terms of our CCTV and our body-worn cameras, and overtime and police equipment, which go to obviously a number of things that help our community relations and our crime reduction strategies. I do want to say that within the hiring, more than just the police officers, and again, to the goal of hiring police officers as a number one, would be a few other ancillary but important hires, including our community outreach, community services officers, hopeful pool of people to bring in. We don't have it in here, but the crisis response team has been invaluable for the county and for us in bringing about some resolution to problems that we have in the city with violence and aftermath and counseling. We're going to hopefully help them a little bit, but it's a small amount of funding for that. And some of the initiatives to getting the hiring going fast doesn't happen by itself. So some of the plan involves bringing in resources to move our hiring process quicker. And I did outline it. Again, this is just an outline, but just if you want, I will go through each of them either quickly or we can be more comprehensive and then answer questions any time.
Can we ask questions right now?
Absolutely.
Just take it as we go. Yeah. Okay.
So the laterals, boy, we're still getting all this reverberation. The laterals, are they going to cause concerns with the already existing staff? Are they coming in laterals at the entry level or up and down across the board?
Laterals always come in at entry level, but laterals pay is usually higher than fresh recruits, and that's something we'd set up a number of years ago depending on their experience, and they come in maybe making upward of 5% more, I think, of their last salary. It's negotiable, but never more than a step 7, which is capped. There's an amount there. So they do come in higher compensated, but with no more seniority.
So they're not going to eliminate some headroom for existing officers?
No, not by the standards we're approaching. The amount of funding that we're asking for hirees takes into account lateral pay, high lateral pay. So I will say that some of the estimates here are on the high end when you talk about hiring, because we wanted to make sure that the Finance Committee and the Council understand, and the administration, that we don't want to get caught short on an estimate. So we make sure that we're at the higher end of what we could come out less money than this, but this is the highest paid scenario.
So the $5,000, do you think that's an attractive bonus?
I think it's very competitive, and I think it is attractive. If you note, then one of the things we recommend is to pay a $5,000 hiring bonus to laterals as the city once did. We now have a $1,500 finder's bonus that's been in play that the union agreed with the city many years ago, that if an officer finds someone who's a viable police officer, new or lateral, they can get $1,500 after the probation period. This incentivizes the hiree to choose us over another agency. I built into this as well that some of these won't be laterals. For those who aren't laterals, we may pay upward of $8,000 a year, rather, for their academy. So what I did is I took the median, I took $5,000 and $8,000, there's $6,500, and that's my cost associated with each hiree.
Where do you think we can recruit the laterals from?
I will say that, thank you, I will say that we can recruit them from a lot of places. Our success in terms of the most numbers of recruits have come from Baltimore, and I'll say that they have. Let me go back and say we have gotten in the past a lot of applicants from different places, but most of the applicants for laterals come from Baltimore, and there's a number of reasons for that. I know. There are a lot of agencies that pay a lot. There are agencies that have great working conditions. I'm not impugning the city of Baltimore, but I'm saying that many of the officers that leave Baltimore are looking for different work experience and a good police department as well. But at the same time, we also get lateral applicants from Virginia, which would be comparative compliance. We're looking at one person to possibly hire from Northern Virginia. We're looking at a metropolitan police officer. We've hired officers from Transit Authority, several of them. We've hired 2 or 3 from the school police in Baltimore in recent years, and they've turned out extremely well. Very good quality officers. And one of the benefits, again, hiring whether it's from Baltimore or anywhere, is we get an opportunity to look at their background very carefully and make very good decisions based on their work history. So, we're not turning down. We even have a Cottage Village officer who's, though a very small agency, is looking very good in our process.
So the 6 community service officers, are they police officers or not?
No, the recommendation 6 is hopeful, but community services officers are civilians. They're going to be they're kids essentially, 18 to 21 years of age. And what that's going to allow us to have is a bunch of very interested, youthful people who can work with us, learn the job, learn the police department, work in our communication centers, work in the community, help us in various ways. Learning us, we learn them, and we get an opportunity to see how they are as workers. So it's somewhat like a farm system, because the interest is having local recruits. And I believe that most of the community outreach officers will be local. They may be Annapolis high grads. They may be people who are, living nearby, who have family in Annapolis, who are interested in coming back to Annapolis. So there's one helpful way to recruit local people. It's not a police job. It's a job that helps us. It's a force multiplier. In other words, it's not a waste of money for us to have them, because there's so many things that we do inside that we would ordinarily need to use police for. This would actually
not
lighten up.
mentioned in here, but I think the hope that some of us share is by having more police officers, we can have more community policing. They're not going to lend to that, are they?
No, they certainly will. In the first place, the community services officers, if we get them, we're hoping to get them, won't cost the city as much as we'll get out of them. And I say that for a number of reasons. They'll be contract workers, and if they're not going to be future police officers, and that's pretty early on known, then we don't have to retain them. Second, we look at their skill levels. Just because they're young doesn't mean they don't have skills, whether it's technical skills or administrative skills. And then we can use them to do jobs that we are not staffed for now, to improve our ability to do community policing. But even more important, I think, because they'll be working in the community, they'll be exposed to issues and programs in the community too, which will help our community outreach efforts. And since you brought it up, no, I didn't bring a lot of community policing in this document, but community policing is its own strategy, and underlying all of this is our interest in building our ability to be better community policing.
Before we go to Sheila, can you give me a couple examples of something that an officer would be doing now that when you have these people in place, they would be able to sort of tick off their plate, which hopefully would free them up to be on the street more, right? I mean,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So our records department had once had 5 or 6 full-time city benefited workers, and now we're down to 3, sometimes 2, and an extra person. They're working hard, and some of their work is moved over to officers from time to time, whether it's warrants and records and housekeeping with that. These folks would come in and be able to do that at a third of a fraction of the cost, making efficiencies better. And also, we can take on more when we start to do that. We get to a point where there's some things we can't do, but we know we can't do it, so we don't try to do it. Whether it's citations, we can't use them obviously for speeding citations, but there's other programs that we've used them for with warnings, and we put them out on the street for that. Another example would be communications. Right now, we are 3 short of having the number we need for radio communications people. Now, it takes a long time to learn that, but with extra help in there, working the computers, with just doing record checks and so forth, could take a lot of the load off of the people that are there. And the list goes on. I mean, there are a number of things we do out in the community that when we're downtown or whether we're uptown in different events, community fairs and events, that we would put them out there in the right uniform representing the police department. So there's a number of things we would use them for.
So they do wear police department uniforms?
We would have them wear police uniforms. Right now, we have explorers that are something like this, but they're younger. And most of our explorers, not all of them are younger, but some are 16. One of our target audience group would be the explorers, and they would, local too, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're local, and so we get the benefit of that.
Thank you. Sheila?
Yeah, my question's along the same vein with, and I guess what I really need to see is a specific point-by-point job description of what these guys are going to do. Because by their title, it would suggest that they're going to be developing relationships in the community. But what I just heard you describe was more administrative, clerk, that kind of thing. And for the cost of this, we could be putting 2 more officers on the street,
Well, thank you.
at least.
I would never, well, in the first place, and that's a very, very good question. I would never allow these positions to encumber a police officer's position through attrition. The way we operate right now, we know we have vacancies that we may not be able to fill fast enough during a fiscal year to be able to bring people in the meantime as a contract worker who is, say, 20 years old that could be a police officer. The whole goal is to get police officers out of these folks, but better police officers. Because then they learn the job and we learn about them without having to look as far and make mistakes in the process. These folks will already be with us. And many of them will be close to the age of being police officers. So they're going to either move into that job or they will probably not be employed. And yes, they could work in the community as well.
Well, like I said, I would like to see a specific outline of exactly what they're going to do. It sounds like we're going to put them out there into the community, maybe, but there's a risk associated with putting these young men and women in the streets in some of our communities. If it's the type of job that's supposed to help us develop better relationships, I think it concerns me. So I'll wait and hold judgment on that. And, I'm all about giving young people opportunities, absolutely. You mentioned the Explorers program, and that was going to be my question. How, we have that group of young people. What are we doing to nurture them into the position, and are we paying them? Because now we're going to hire another group of young people, separate and apart from the Explorers. I don't know how this is...
Well, I don't see this as all or nothing, and I don't think we do. I know in the past, several of the officers we still have, including, to mind comes Lieutenant John Freeman, became a very good police officer, and many of the officers we have had this type of job. This is somewhat like a cadet job. We don't call them police cadets, we're calling them community services officers. If we call them police cadets, you may have a better understanding of what they'll do. And that's because they'll do everything, including the community. And we would never put kids or people out in the community and run the risk unless they're with officers or expose them to anything that's dangerous. But we would bring them along in ways that can give them that understanding. The difference between the Explorers is really just a matter of how we would use them in their age. I think the Explorers is a great pool of potential future applicants. So we want to use the Explorers, which is a non-paid Boy Scouts program, to bring them into this community services paid position. Because what we're seeing, and I'll give you 2 examples. There are two explorers, both happen to be female, who are very bright, have some college, are moving forward into a career. We don't want them to leave this opportunity to be Annapolis police officers because we didn't give them some compensation. They're not old enough to be police officers yet, but they're getting to that age. So if we offer them something that helps keep them here, so we keep them working with us, we already know that they'll be good police officers by most measures.
So is there any sort of commitment associated with it?
With this, there'd be a commitment. They would have to go to college. They'd be going to take college classes.
Do we give them
the job
college
description will
reimbursement? Do we have college
There's
reimbursement programs?
there's no college reimbursement in our current contract.
Well, that might be something to consider. If you really want to gear them into going into policing, you help them get the degree they need that you want them to have and help them pay for it.
Mhm.
That goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I would be something the administration and we would probably support, but it sounds like something the union would wind up talking about in their negotiations
It's something,
process.
it's permissive bargaining, you're absolutely right.
And I would just leave it with the point that I would never allow the positions to encumber our on-duty police officer opportunities. I don't think we get to a point immediately this year that we'll have all of the officers working right away and not have any budget money left over. So this helps us while we try to get to the primary goal of hiring.
So I'll look forward to that list, maybe at the next
Job
public safety
description, yeah.
meeting.
We have that, we're doing that now, job description.
May I ask a question about
Sure.
body cameras? Are we finished with the test on these body cameras?
No, we're not. We're finishing our third one. We're close to done the third company. We have a very good idea among the three which one we like, but we will likely do a fourth company for a number of reasons, including that the camera company that we have right now, the camera won't do quite what we want. The battery's not lasting, but they think they can get a better camera with a better battery that lasts the full 12 hours. So we're looking at trying them with new cameras, since it's a good company with good feedback, and going to another camera company, but it won't stop the process or the timeline. It won't stop us from making the budget recommendation and having the cameras in place within weeks. My question was the same as yours. It was, how long will it take?
Bless you.
Bless you. How long will it take us to get cameras on us if we have the funding? And really, it's a matter of weeks. It's not a long wait. The companies are out there. We just have to choose the right one.
But if we select or opt to go for a fourth company, then that's another, what, 6-week delay, 8-week delay?
It could be up to 6 weeks. If I haven't gotten a fair thing to say is I haven't gotten all the feedback from all of the camera companies in all the categories. But I think that we're going to be getting together after this camera company is done in the next week, I think, and seeing whether we should go and get another company or not. So the decision to get a fourth one isn't final, but we're discussing that. So in fairness to the committee, I wanted to just say that we may have another company to make sure.
Who's making this decision? What committee are you talking about?
I'm making the decision. The
Okay.
police department is making the decision to go to either try or not try a fourth company. But what I mentioned is that we have an assessment group, which is all the officers that have cameras on them, our state's attorney's office, and those who have involvement in this whole camera purchase process. And there are a number of questions that we're asking, and we're getting feedback. So we're judging the companies independently and seeing whether they met this one better for this, does this have a better battery life, is this camera more secure, and data pools, is it easier? So all these come into play.
I guess my primary question is, Chief, as coming out as president of the Chiefs, you all talk. Every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland is analyzing cameras right now and making the same consideration. Is there no sharing of information? I would think that the 3 top companies have already risen to the top, so I don't understand further delay.
Well, we found out, thank you, we found out that we're more thorough in some ways than some of the places that wish they did what we're doing. I don't want to go into it as much, just to bring up information about another agency, but there are some agencies that didn't know about some of the shortcomings or some of the issues that we're finding out just by asking the right questions. I do think there are a ton of camera companies. All of them offer some solution. I want to find the best ones for our officers, and so there's buy-in from the people that we're using. I don't think that we're going to turn the city of Frederick, I think, examined 6 companies, so we're looking at their results too. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't potentially go to another company, but we want to make sure that we're comfortable with the cameras. I don't see any. Most of the agencies that have gone into body-worn cameras have spent upward of a year in making the decision. I think we're going to be on a much faster track than that, than a year.
I'm not sure we are at the rate we're going. It's already been, what, 8 months?
Right. I don't think it's been quite that long since we started our camera testing. We've had 3 companies. This would be our 3rd company, and they've been 6 weeks each, with maybe a week delay between one. I think we're in the 3 or 4 month range.
Feels like a delaying tactic, Chief.
Well, we're not going to delay. We're going to make sure that the cameras are right. I don't see any, as part of my recommendation, if we get the funding for this, we're going to be able to turn that into body-worn cameras in very short order. I don't see any delay. If there's any delay, it's because we're not completely satisfied after we see everything with these 3 companies. And I don't know that to be so.
Mr. Andrews, what's the process? Once the Finance Committee approves this $1.25 million, then what? Does it go to the council? On Monday night?
It's on a very fast track.
Okay, so the money will be available on the 10th of January?
What's on the agenda for Monday council
Mhm.
meeting? So if you approve it on Monday, then the money will be available virtually the next day.
Okay.
So,
If I may, I'm sorry.
well, I wanted to continue to discuss the list.
Sure, but if Alderman, I'm sorry, if I may, I could say
Sure.
we may not go 6 weeks for the next company. We may know in 2 weeks whether it's a problem and go forward with what we have, or we may know in 2 or 3 weeks that it's a very good solution and be satisfied with it. I don't want to necessarily say that we're going to need 6 more weeks for one more company. I think we have to be, and it won't take long to know, within the next week or 2, we'll be pretty sure whether we need to wait any more time.
Chief, the last time we had this discussion, you said you got 3 companies, you think that's enough, and now I'm hearing you have a 4th company, and so anyway, that's my concern is that we're delaying it.
Well,
For
there's,
whatever the reason might be. The
there
money
there are
will
a
be
lot of,
available
there are a
on the
lot of
10th of
concerns.
January.
There were concerns with a lot of with some of the equipment, and there were concerns that I don't want to pick the wrong one. I want to pick the right one for the city of Annapolis, and then we'll make sure it won't be a long time, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I think perhaps it might be important to remember, though, that until now, that money would not have been available until next fiscal year, regardless of what his testing showed, if we weren't doing a budget transfer this fiscal year. So he would have evaluated his cameras, he would ask for the money for next fiscal year, which wouldn't become available until July 1st. So you're moving this process up by 3 months, just by if you approve this transfer today.
Well, if I remember correctly, the plan was to have a company in place so that the mayor would put in his budget the cost of the cameras.
That's correct, but that money wouldn't have been available until July 1st,
Right.
assuming the council appropriated it during the budget process.
Right, but we would still have to know how much that should be so that the mayor could put it in his budget,
Oh,
correct?
absolutely, but I'm saying,
Which would
with
be,
this transfer, if you approve it, that money's available
right,
next week. That's okay.
Yeah, I understand that, but I was just saying, what I thought was an urgency was so that
Get
it
to
could
the finish
impact the
line
mayor's
So you
budget.
see the total cost of the thing, so you can then start to plan for that.
Exactly. Yeah,
understand.
so we don't have to plan for it because the money is there now, at least short term.
Sure.
So,
Alderman Arnett?
thank you, Chief.
Well,
I
I do have
apologize.
several more questions, but Alderman Payon hasn't had a chance. And you can jump in whenever you want, Fred. I can go on, or if you have some right now, I certainly will yield.
Nope, go right ahead.
All right. So, I'm looking at the overtime amount. You know, we read this, Chief. We're all anxious to make this work, so I don't think you need to go through it point by point. But in last year's budget, we insisted that we properly budget for the full overtime amount that costs. Are you, by this statement, saying you need still 150,000 more than the 1.1 million?
Well, to be honest, to be frank, I would think we're going to need more than 150,000 more than, when you say 1.1 million, no, I think that would be fairly accurate. I do think we're on the track right now of exceeding that number, and I'm delighted to explain why we are spending more overtime than that. But this amount of overtime was put in here because that is approximately what we would use for extra enforcement. Right now, we're paying for that extra enforcement out of our budget, and it has over the last few months accelerated our use of overtime. but it was done, you know, in earnest to make sure that we didn't have any violent crime. We were doing our best in every way, including using overtime to save lives. And I'm hopeful that even though it's not measurable what we prevented, I'm hoping that worked. But that amount of money that's listed in the overtime here will not necessarily offset the shortage in our budget of overtime.
Okay, so that's getting to my major point is twofold. One, can you really spend all this money in this fiscal year? But two, what we don't have here is a really good look at the out-year costs, because we're focusing on 6 months at best case. So for hiring more officers, the $602,000, do I double that for the cost in the next fiscal year? So it's 1.2 million for a full year?
I think that's thank you. I think that's a safe estimate.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because looking at finance's estimate on the amount it would cost to fund an officer for a year, and we looked at higher paid officers, including lateral officers, it approximates, it's over $100,000 a year. It's about 120 maybe.
But are
with
we, on
benefits.
cameras, are we nearing the end of expenditures on cameras? So once we're done with this, we'll have maintenance of cameras and hiring people to look at the cameras, but
Well,
or
thank
do we
you.
have another dollop of additional cameras in the next fiscal year?
What we will see, this will cover the cameras as planned now throughout the whole city. What it will not cover will be the ongoing connection fees and charges to keep the cameras going. That was not built into the budget. That in itself is a separate number that we have to build as an enhancement going forward year to year. This covers, and you may have noticed that I've reduced the estimated total from 300,000 to 259 because I failed to see it when I put this report together that $87,000 was earmarked from our Capital City Safe Streets funds
Right.
that we already essentially have planned to use encumbered really in Eastport Terrace and Clay Street. So we reduced it and we increased some, but the recurring costs is something that we're going to have to put in every year. But this amount, this 259, should cover all of the city's camera needs as far as infrastructure, and it will cover the cost of a person, an extra person, to monitor just for the 6 months.
But that extra person will be an ongoing cost.
And it would be built into the budget, yes.
So on the body cameras, let's take the high end, $130,000. Is that for a half a year's worth of body cameras? So in the next fiscal year, fiscal 19, we would double that number?
No, not necessarily. I have preliminary estimates, and if you turn to the page where body cameras are shown on page 3, in the second paragraph down from body cameras, you'll see a very quick snapshot of companies 1 through 3.
Right?
Company 1 was, of all the cameras we tested, was the highest cost to us. The year 1 cost was different than the year 2 cost, and so on. So year 1 cost is $222,000. That's a high note. That's the highest among all 3 companies. So I put that as the top possibility. And then I added $35,000 in redaction costs, again, an estimate. You'll notice for the same company...
What is redaction, by the way?
Okay, well, redaction is where either the city or the state's attorney would necessarily have a service to remove some footage that shouldn't be reviewed by the public,
Okay.
confidential and sources and
That-
so forth. But just so you
I'm
can...
surprised that's that cheap.
well, it could be
'Cause
less
it could
or
be
more.
very time intensive.
To be frank, it was actually it was ordered here originally at $25,000, but I thought that $25,000 was too cheap. And today, after meeting with the state's attorney's office on point, they believe that their cost is going to be very high
I
if
think
they're
so,
going to
too.
do what we're asking them to do. And we haven't gotten their price tag on this yet. I'm waiting for that. That's going to be conversation within probably the next couple weeks, because what we have to find out essentially is how many cases will we make that will have camera evidence, multiply that out by how many months are in a year, and how many officers show up. The state's attorney's in a position where they want all the footage for every arrest, no matter how many cameras are there. And the question now is bantered between us as to whose job that's going to be. I think it could be anyone's job, but who's going to pay for it is where we haven't quite settled on yet.
Who wants the redaction?
State's attorney's going to need the redaction when it comes to cases, and we're going to want the redaction when it comes to certain PIA disclosures for the city, because...
So I think the point there is that even if you end up not redacting anything, you have to look at everything.
Everything.
And that's, I think that's an extraordinarily low number. I would be surprised if redaction isn't more expensive than the cameras.
That number, let me clarify, you're absolutely right, that number's not built into this. That number that you're talking about is built into, it hasn't, and it is an oversight that I didn't address the need in this to add at least one, but maybe two more full-time contract people. But what I did is I'm in consultation now with Baltimore County, Philadelphia, Chicago, and a number of agencies to see, and in Maryland and Laurel and other places, to see whether they're using full-duty police officers to do the data pulls, or whether they're using contract people. To use full police officers, the hiring will cover that for a while. I do think we're going to probably split the duty, and I think that there'll be times we're going to want certification processing, we're going to want full-duty officers, and we're going to want, I think we're going to need at least two people, whether full-duty or contract people, to pull our data.
I think easily.
The state
So
may
here,
need it.
so here, the bottom line for me, Chief, is there's no doubt in my mind that my constituents want this spending, and there's no doubt in my mind that you're the qualified person to figure out how to spend it. But I think there's also no doubt in my mind that $1.25 million in this current fiscal year is easily $2 million in the upcoming mayor's budget to carry on all of these programs. Otherwise, it's foolish to spend it. It'd be one-time spending, then we turn it off.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
I think
I don't
$2
wanna-
million may be an underestimate depending upon some of these intangibles like redaction.
well, I do think that it's the redaction cost is a moving target. We're not sure. I do think that whether we use two contract people to do this, again, is an additional $120,000 or so into the next budget. You know, I think that the recurring costs were never built into the cameras, so we have to continue to enhance that. And the more cameras we get, the more recurring maintenance and recurring costs we have for connection. So those numbers have to be presented to the administration also in our
Right.
budget process. And I will say, though, just to answer your question you earlier asked, the $222,000, the half of that this year, it does go down in almost all of these deals. Years 2 through 4, it goes down to about $100,000. In almost all of the companies, it's $100,000 a year. The first company,
So in
again,
the first dollop, it's both purchasing the camera plus getting them all installed and everything, and then after that, it's
you own it.
maintaining
You own the
them.
cameras with one. We don't want to own these cameras necessarily, but one of the plans happens to be you own the cameras, but we're probably not going to have the cameras beyond the 6 years or so of the agreement because of the technology changes. So it
We'll
depends.
all be gone then, so.
Yeah. But I do agree that these are, I don't
I
necessarily
would
think we're-
encourage you to be scrupulous in trying to anticipate all of the actual costs. This isn't a time, everyone is of a mind, I believe, I'd be surprised if this isn't going to be unanimous from the council. If not, it'll be very close. Because we've heard from our constituents and we want public safety. There's just no doubt about it. But we need to be wise in understanding that this isn't a one-time only commitment. This is a commitment for the long haul. It is a new order of magnitude step up. Just the same kind of arguments I made on the SAFER grant for fire. You hire 12 new firefighters, they're not going to go away after 2 years. And we don't want the police officers to go away. We would like you to get in the best quality officers you can. If it's laterals, it's laterals, and if we can build a pool, a training pool. But I think everyone of my constituents likes this idea. I think they I won't even pretend that I fully understand what community policing means and how effective it is, but I can tell you that my constituents seem to know what it is, and they seem to think that it's effective. So that's where my vote's going to be. But we need to really understand the down the road impacts of all of this. This is a big jump.
Well, I do appreciate the reality that there's a long-range impact. And so everything we do today, including a 6-week delay or however long we need to make sure we get the right stuff, the right equipment, I think is essential for our future success. And to the extent that we're hiring laterals or others, right now, we've given a written exam to 79 applicants, lately 71 passed. We are rapidly looking at who was automatically disqualified and how many of them are not in the process anymore, and we're focusing on 10 right now. So we boiled down 79 to 10, but it doesn't happen overnight. This is a lot of man hours, a lot of person hours trying to figure it out. But we'll have a combination of new
Yeah.
people who are good and laterals who are good when we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Alderman Payon, so it seems like in answering the questions, I think we've touched on all of the sort of buckets of money here. The last one we didn't really talk about is sort of equipment and vehicles after overtime. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I would. If I can go back to, well, in the first place, I think the assertion that we're not going to spend the full $600 or $580-some thousand because there's a 6-month period, our hiring is progressive. If we're lucky and we hired all 8 people in this estimate today, and they were all laterals and they all got top pay and they started tomorrow, then we would be at that number. Right. But that's not the case. That won't happen. So, in putting this document together, I wanted to be able to explain that whatever wouldn't be spent there, we could very easily supplement essential categories of equipment and overtime. I think our cameras, also our body-worn cameras, lends to the argument that we could maybe pay and not put in the next budget the full year versus half. I estimated half, and then the budget process would get the other half, but I don't know if that's, and I'll talk to the city manager, if that's the best approach or not. But to the idea that there could be surplus money, or there could be an additional amount, there happen to be overtime needs that, as you've mentioned, we have exceeded our overtime spending. And our vehicle and equipment, I mean, there's cell phone material, there's a number of things that there's a lot of equipment that we looked at, and I happen to have a long list of what our officers, and I involve the whole agency, what our officers feel can be good for crime fighting and community outreach. So I do have with me a very basic list of, and it adds up to over $1 million, believe it or not, or $500,000. It's not the kind, I'm not going to sit there and say, well, here's a $490,000 piece of equipment that's very important and we could get people off the street faster with it. It's technology. Whether that's going to be the most important, it's not going to be a standalone item that I would be able to make an argument. But there could be money that we could put towards that, and with maybe use of other funding, find a way to buy it. And I think that's where I'm hopeful that
Right.
extra
So
funds
what
could-
you've done here, which I like, is giving us a whole menu of different selections and things, and I have no doubt that when we go to put it in place, monies may shift from one category to another, but I think we can spend it wisely. I trust that you can spend it wisely. But again, there will be down the road, the splash of reality next year. We're borrowing from previous year's savings. Next year, there might not be any previous year savings, so that means this will be a real increase in spending or another hit on what then will morph into the fund balance taking. And so we need to be realistic about this.
Thank you, and that's my commitment. I know it's the mayor's commitment, and I've heard him say it, public safety, we'll make sure that the funds are spent right, and Tom agrees, city manager agrees, that we'll make sure that it's categorically right here, but what we buy and what we do will be measured before we do it.
Okay.
Alderman Payon?
So soon? Didn't you
Hey.
call on me like 10 minutes ago? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for being a few moments late. Unfortunately, didn't anticipate a half-hour ride in from Admiral Heights to City Hall. Traffic is a nightmare. Getting out of town and backed up even to the circle on West Street and Taylor Avenue, and backed up further on West Street trying to get toward Route Boulevard. And fortunately, I'm born and raised here. I know a few shortcuts and was able to get here as quickly as I did, but again, I apologize. Look, I've been listening mostly to the testimony since I got here, and it's a couple of things strike me as being pretty obvious. First of all, these are steps that people want us to take. Secondly, by and large, they're just good ideas. I mean, we're going to have to figure out a way to pay for them. We certainly need to not pay any more than we have to for any of these, and that's important. Money isn't exactly growing on trees around here, around City Hall, and this is a big hit to anybody's budget, but it is public safety and it's important, extremely important. Look, we're just going to do the best we can with the body cameras and the overtime. We've got very limited control over a number of these things, and I don't know what to say other than, hey, we're just going to have to figure out a way to pay for them.
Thank you.
Let the record show that Alderman Payon is asking for a tax rate increase.
Bite your tongue.
Chief, is there anything else you want to get into?
No, but thank you very much, and if there are any changes, I'll make sure that they're properly transmitted to the
Thank you.
committee.
Yeah, I will certainly agree with all my colleagues. I think we've had conversations about this, and this idea has come forward from the administration, and having this plan of the targets of where you're using your expertise to figure out where we should be allocating those resources makes a lot of sense to me. And I keep saying to my constituents when they express frustration about particular crime incidents that I think, we basically are in a period where we have to try some new stuff, and I'm not sure, all of it will necessarily, translate into those results, but I think we're in a period where we have to shake it up and try some things, and I think this is a good list of places to start and to apply resources and see what outcomes we can affect. So I certainly am supportive of it.
I move a recommendation of approval of this GT to the council.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Nice job, Chief.
Thank you.
So the only other thing, is there a finance department update, Nikki, or do you want to roll that over for when Bruce is back?
I can provide a quick update.
Great.
There's not much to update. The holidays have been upon us and took us away from the office a little bit. The audit and the CAFR are wrapping up. So Clifton Larson Allen, who is our auditor firm, are also preparing our financial statements, and we expect to have the CAFR completed at the end of January.
Great. Any questions about anything going on in the finance department, or?
No questions from me.
Okay. Thank you.
Do I get a water bill cut this month? No. Darn.
I would move to nominate Mr. Pfeiffer as chair of the finance committee.
Second.
I guess that's the only way out, I guess, is to,
Hey, we're going to get our,
Getting our money's worth.
right.
Exactly.
If you're going out, we're going to get our pound of flesh.
Fair enough. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? My thought is, I was thinking about it today on the way over, since we have basically through this year, should we think about maybe adjusting the times of the meetings? I know we set this up years ago when it was, more tied to, so is there any appetite to do something kind of different? And is there benefit from the staff's point of view to meet different times? I know when we get into budget season, we tend to meet more during the day, which is fine, but it's more a question of, is there anything that makes more sense than others? At this point, we meet Tuesdays twice a month at
Right.
5
My
o'clock.
constituents want them to start at 8 o'clock in the evening.
Actually, despite the fact that I arrived late due to traffic, and it's not the first time that's happened, I think 5 o'clock's the best time.
Okay. Cool.
I mean,
was
maybe 4:30, but 5 is fine with me.
Yeah, I'm fine with the way we're doing it. As a quick point of information, I was able to see a demonstration of an accounting package called Open Government that Nikki is very familiar with, that will make it much easier for us, the committee, and all of the council members, and actually anyone, to do financial analysis. The other part that I like about it is you can really go straight from Munis to this package without having to go to the dreaded Excel spreadsheet that only one person in the world can manage. But one of the interesting things that came out of that whole dialogue was other communities have themed budgets. There was a community, actually, that one of the staff came from, where he was mayor. Was he the mayor of that? Finance director. That was a public safety budget. And so that was the expressed emphasis for the budget. There's another one that was an environmental budget. You could have one that's a sea level rise budget, or taking from the county executive's new repertoire, you could have a quality of life budget. But it's interesting to think about our budgeting. We tend to take whatever the mayor dishes budget, and I don't have the strong impression of any of the mayors during my tenure, which is 3, that they really did have an emphasis for their budget or a focus. And so one of the things that we will be able to do with this is to think about that. The other thing, because this company services 269 other municipalities, we can look at all of the data from those other municipalities.
Sure.
So that whole thing about being able to try to compare us to Rockville or whatever, we can compare ourselves to 269 communities,
yeah.
many of which are our size, some of which are services akin to ours. So I think it's going to be a powerful new tool. I guess I'm waiting for Bruce to approve me getting an account. And I asked for an account for all of the council members.
So actually, the contract was signed today. So moving forward, there's a couple steps that we need to take on our side with the live data integration and working with OpenGov, and also getting, currently our chart of accounts is done in a line-by-line basis, but we do the budget in a programmatic basis. So I'm going to need to work with Adam, who you spoke with, in converting our data from Munis, from a line detail, into programmatic for the Munis the OpenGov platform. But once we have kind of the background stuff worked out, we'll be providing login information for all of the Alder people to view, so you can go in and play. Eventually the platform, at least the transparency platform, will be available to the public, and they can click on and do the same thing. But the budget would be internal.
That'd be really cool.
So there's going to be a work
big part of it.
session for us, and then they have an open government university,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a dedicated person who is in Atlanta that we can call to get help 24/7. Yeah, that's what they said.
But like a component is then you could basically, in the community, be able to show, right, that's what we've talked about before in the past, all these
I know, I've already
different
talked to
technologies.
Kardesh about some presentations at Maryland Hall.
Yeah, the Budget Builder platform, which is the new one that we're taking on, once we have everything set up, you can go in and create multiple budgets for the same year and kind of compare and contrast, like you had said, with emphasis, if one is a public safety budget versus, say doing a tax increase versus not, versus cutting X and Y. You can line them all up and compare, and it, with a click of a button, you have charts and graphs available, and
OpenGov?
it's very powerful.
Right.
Mhm.
Cool.
And so I think it'll satisfy I remember when Dick Israel always said, look, I just want to see charts and graphs. I don't want to get into the details of it. And then you've got people like Joe and I that want to muck around under the hood kind of thing. And everybody, there's a range in between.
I'm out of the Dick Israel school.
Well, but one of the things that Sheila and I were talking about this, I promised, is if I want to do a report, I'm more than happy to share it with everyone. If you want to look at it, fine. If you don't, that's fine. I bet Joe and I will be the ones that sort of get into the details, because that's just the kind of oddballs that we are. But
Well said.
it's something we can share. We can share it. And the other thing is, we don't have to design our own reports. There's a whole bunch of ones that are already used by other municipalities. So one of the things I've asked for is sort of a smorgasbord of what kinds of reports do other municipalities use. Why reinvent the wheel?
Exactly.
If we can just copy what they do.
Like it. Okay, any other items or anything for the good of the order?
I've got a motion.
Please.
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.